Hello YouTube, this is a brief kind of review video on the order of operations. So very technically accurate, but here we go. We say it's really important that we carry out our operations using the order of operations. The reason why is because when we evaluate expressions, you can see down here we have a few expressions we're going to be evaluating. You can see how a person might get confused and do their operations in a different order as somebody else, and you would get a different value when you evaluated your expression. So we want to make sure that we follow the same rules. So this just helps us make sure that we don't get out of order, of course. And so, of course, the mnemonic everybody's probably heard of is PEMDAS, okay? And this stands for parentheses for our P here, exponents for our E. I want to make a note here. I say multiplication and division. Those kind of go together, okay? We kind of say parentheses stands on its own, exponents, M and D go together, and then addition and subtraction go together as well. And so I guess here's the thing. You do 5 million evaluations of an expression using the order of operations. You kind of have it down after a while. You don't have to think about this too hard. It just feels right to do it that way. But I will say that this multiplication and division and this addition and subtraction, I want to be clear on this. We do these from left to the right in terms of our expression. And this is probably the #1 most confusing thing. I've taught this to a lot of teenagers, and I'll tell you what, is the fact that which one you do first. The mnemonic says multiplication and division, and one would think you do your multiplication first and your division second, or you do your addition first and your subtraction second, but technically, you would do your division first if it comes left of multiplication in terms of an expression. So, we'll just kind of talk about common sense when we do these down here, but we say first things first. We're always going to do our grouping symbols first, and we say parentheses. I want to make a note here that it can include brackets, okay? So brackets, they count as parentheses also in algebra. Sometimes I might write something squared like that, and it doesn't matter. But we're going to do our parentheses first, then our powers, and then we say, then do multiplication and divisions, or products and quotients from left to right. We'll talk about what I mean by that here. And then do addition subtractions or sums and differences from left to right. So let's start with, say this expression down here. If I wanted to evaluate how I would do it, would I do our 3 plus 4 first? Or would I, distribute this 4 throughout the parentheses? If you've been in an algebra class before, that distribution exists. Or, I noticed actually though that this parentheses, a set of parentheses has a 2 on it. So should I do my exponent? So how does this work? Well, the first thing we want to do is look for any grouping symbols. And of course we have our parentheses here. So we need to do what's inside them first. So my suggestion is this: when you do order of operations, the best thing you could do for yourself is just rewrite the expression a lot of times. So this would become like 3 plus 4 times. We're going to do what was inside the parentheses first and just rewrite this as something squared, which of course a minus 6 would then be 2. Okay. And you say, oh, well, what would be next? Well, grouping symbols, we can see that we don't have anything left to do inside the parentheses. So next thing up on the docket is power. We have this exponent. So recall that this 2 from our last video only applies to its base. So we have 3 plus 4 times technically 2 times 2. And, I wouldn't technically always write this out, but I say 2 times 2, which would be 4, but 2 squared is 4. So we could say this is the same thing as 3 times 4, or 3 plus 4 times 4. And so we get now, oops, I guess I need to slow down a little bit here, but our exponents are done. We say, okay, now next do we have any multiplication and division? Of course, we see from left to right here we have multiplication with these 2 factors right here. So we'd say 3 plus 16, and then we'd get our value here, 19. So this evaluated expression would just be 19. So when somebody says evaluate, I just want to be clear on this really quickly. Evaluate means kind of take the values that you've been given, or the values that you have, and try to boil it down to a single value. Okay, and we did. We were able to get 19 from this, and everybody should be able to get 19. Let's take a look at these next 2 examples really quickly. We say, looking at example B here, we have 2 sets of grouping symbols here. We have grouping inside of grouping. And one thing I kind of want to point out here is this: people tend to get thrown off by grouping. And honestly, first thing you should always do is grouping. But I want to point out you could throw parentheses around any of this stuff here, and you're gonna get something that says do what's inside that first. And so in terms of grouping, you could put grouping around anything. The order you want to do something in is kind of a little bit up to you in the slightest degree, okay? But in this instance, it seems that we have to start inside here. So I notice that I'm going to start with the grouping inside the grouping. And I notice there's nothing to do with this -3 inside these parentheses here. So I say, well, let's do what's inside these grouping symbols next. So rewriting is our best plan of action. -8 plus 5 times what was the parentheses, inside the parentheses, what its value was. So we say 1 minus a -3, of course, taking away a negative, adding a positive, so we get 4. And now next, again, just like our last expression, we have to do our exponents next. We say -8 plus 5 times 4 to the third. So we say 4 times 4 times 4. With exponential things, when in doubt, write it out. I know it's cheesy, but we say 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 4 is 64. So now we have negative 8 plus 5 times this 64. And again, we say, okay, well now, do I have any more exponents? No. Do I have any multiplication and division? Yes, I have multiplication here. So we say negative 8 plus, now 5 times 60 would be 300, and 5 times 4 is 20. So we say this is 320. Of course, adding a negative to a positive here, we'll do our addition and subtraction last here. We say add these two values from left to right. So we'd say that we'd get a 312 value here when we evaluate this expression and boil it down to this simple value. And then last but not least, you notice I use brackets on this last one. Now notice I said on this last one, we could put grouping symbols on darn near anything, and I kind of mean it when I say it, like I could do this over here. I could put parentheses around this. And honestly, what I want to show in this example is it's not a crime to go about this kind of in that way. It's just kind of using common sense. So I noticed that, say, I did have grouping symbols here. You know, I could do this 5 squared here, and it's not against the rules for me to say that this is, say, a 25. And we notice that here we have minus 6 times, in terms of grouping, I have more grouping here, so we need to do what's inside our grouping symbols. We have something to the 4th. And in this case, we have 2 plus a negative 1. This is the same thing as 2 minus 1, so we would get a 1. And I like this one, and the reason why is because, you know, we say 1 to the 4th. We do our exponents next. 1 to the anything is going to be itself. So we say 6 times 1 to the 4th is 6 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, or 1. And now we can do our multiplication from left to right, 25 minus 6, and then last but not least, we would get 19. So again, you know, it looks like we got 19 on 2 of these, but that is kind of the order of operations in a nutshell.